I am very excited about this panel. As I mentioned before, I own a company called The Bridge, and we sit at the intersection of innovation, regulation, and society. And as part of that, we have a professional network that includes everyone from all the stakeholders in that area, but technologists as well as the regulators, as well as civil society folks. And it is my pleasure to be here with Andre from Zillow and Michael from the National Fair Housing Alliance, because we're going to be talking about how Zillow is using the technology, AI, to help with the fair housing issues, and then how Michael and Andre are working together. And this is exactly what the mission of my company is. So I'm thrilled to be here today. So thankful to CDI for hosting us. And I think I'm actually going to start with Michael and let you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Andre.
All right, thanks, Ali. Yeah, so I'm Michael Akinwumi, Chief Responsible AI Officer with the National Fair Housing Alliance. So the National Fair Housing Alliance is a civil rights organization that focuses on eliminating any form of discrimination or bias in housing and making sure that people have equal access to well-resourced communities. And when it comes to having access to well-resourced communities, I mean, technology, AI in particular, could be used responsibly or otherwise, right? And what I really focus on in my role is making sure that we continue to promote or advance the positive aspect of AI while also mitigating the risk of AI. So just to briefly summarize the areas that we focus on when it comes to responsible use of AI in housing, there are 5 areas. One, we want to make sure that there is a fair or equitable access to the use of AI in housing, and then also privacy-preserving solutions. When you're thinking about using AI in housing, the third area is around safety, and by safety, we're thinking about reliable systems, valid systems, and the fourth area that we focus on is transparency, including explainability and other related solutions. And the last area, which is the 5th one, is human-centered governance solutions or frameworks when we're looking at the use of AI in housing.
Awesome. And Andre, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing at Zillow?
Yeah, my name is Andre Linda. I've been working at Zillow for 6 years, and really part of my job is to manage teams in the AI organization. I'm a director of AI. And so hopefully some of you use Zillow, and so if you think about some of our products, how really the company was founded to turn on the lights for our customers by using AI. It really started as an AI model, as a measuring model to put a number on every roof. And that really was an example where we really tried to turn on the lights and empower our customers with more information so that they can have a better, more equipped conversation with real estate agents and make better decisions. And obviously, since then, we've been applying AI in many different areas. Think about natural language search, home recommendations, and more recently, how do you immerse yourself in a home? And so, my team is focused on helping us understand user preferences and personalize their experience, and also supporting broader ethical AI and responsible AI efforts at Zillow. We really think that AI is a like Michael said, it has a huge upside, there's a huge opportunity in terms of leveling the playing field for people to find housing and understand housing. But also there's a responsibility, as we probably get into, in real estate, there's a fair housing, there's a fair lending, there's a lot of history of discrimination and segregation. We want to make sure that our AI algorithms are using our data in the right way, and we make the right decision and empower everybody to make the better decision. So we're really happy to be here.
I think one of the things we were talking about before is kind of how I bet that everyone, when they saw this panel and was super excited to come join us, was thinking that we'd probably be talking about bias, discrimination, and then how AI is kind of maybe going to make that worse, or what the issues are. But what these two are working on is how AI can help us better understand those issues and then kind of help make those issues better in the future. So, Michael, we were talking about before, 3 buckets that you focus on, and then Andre kind of had some insights into how his team thinks about those 3 buckets too. So I thought that would be super helpful for you.
Sure. So when it comes to AI use in housing and also lending, right? I think it's really helpful to look at it from 3 buckets. So just think of any AI system without really focusing much on the architecture or the engineering side, right? You can always break it into 3 buckets. So you have the data, you have the algorithm itself, And then you also have the decisions or policies that are coming from applying the algorithm to the data. Now, what is so peculiar about housing is that you want to think about the history of discrimination, redlining, for example, or how agents will steer those who are looking for properties from one community to the other, right? So which is really rife when we're talking about housing data. So this history of discrimination, segregation, you will see them when you analyze or look at housing data. But the cool thing is that there are solutions out there, and by solutions I mean machine learning solutions, AI solutions, for addressing or mitigating discrimination or bias in each of these buckets. For example, when we talk about algorithmic fairness, you look at data, we have what we call pre-processing algorithms for helping those who are developing these solutions to understand these different patterns of discrimination and segregation in data, and then also making recommendations about how to effectively remove or mitigate those patterns at the data level. And when we're talking about algorithm also, we have what we call in-processing techniques, fairness techniques, or in-processing algorithms. So at the Fair Housing Alliance, we've been looking into how some of these techniques could help those who are developing AI or machine learning solutions to constrain their algorithms so that they're going to be fair at the algorithm level. For example, we have solutions that look at the way you construct or define your objective, right? And you're building in fairness as an additional constraint to make sure that your solutions are also fair. Now, at the decision layer or the policy layer, so we all know that what you get out of machine learning solutions are numeric values, right? So you still need to use your business policies to translate those numerical solutions into actionable recommendations that people can act on. So at that layer where you make your decisions, there are also what we call post-processing techniques for making sure that the outcomes that you are making recommendations on are not necessarily perpetuating disparities that are actually coming from the data. So with that said, even though we know that housing is rife with history of bias and discrimination, there are machine learning techniques or AI techniques for addressing all these issues at each of those buckets that I mentioned.
And Andre, can you talk a little about how your team is thinking about those three buckets as well?
Absolutely, and I think when you think about fair housing, you might think about protected classes, and the question you might ask is like, well, are you using protected classes? And of course we are not. But I think the important thing to realize is that as soon as you touch any data in real estate, inevitably the data is correlated with race, with national origin, and as Michael described, there's a potential danger. But to understand this data at scale, AI actually turns out to be a very powerful tool. And so we're using AI to understand, across millions of homes, what is written in the listing description. It's really difficult for human to understand, if I take one market on another, to understand the differences and how do I explain some of the patterns that we're seeing. So AI is a really powerful ally in that. Furthermore, when it comes to customers, searching on Zillow, we want to make sure that you don't have to just think about zip code, type of zip code, and that's what you see, right? How do we really make you aware of all the different options you have? And so we work to ensure our algorithms are comprehensive in the way we show you options, that they represent the markets that we have listings from, and will help people understand all the different options they have.
What's an example of that? Like, what would be kind of what was happening before, and then what Zillow is developing now, and how that would be different for the user?
Yeah, as an example, like I mentioned, it used to be that you would have to be very specific with your criteria. Like, I want this zip code, this number of bedrooms. We use AI to build natural language search that really makes it easier for you to express your desires. You can be less specific, and therefore the results we return and the information we give you is a little bit more comprehensive and it's more representative of the market. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. The one other thing we were talking about too is Michael, earlier you said privacy and fairness can both exist together, which was a very interesting conversation to have, just because I feel like coming from the tech policy world, that is not really a phrase you hear all that often. But can you talk a little bit about like what you were thinking on that? And then
sure.
I know, Andre, you had a lot to say on that too.
Yeah, sure. So Andre the other time was talking about, with machine learning or AI, We're talking about proxies for protected classes, right? And that means that, you want to move your attention from disparate impact to disparate treatments, right? And the interesting thing is that with AI, you're actually using multiple variables that could be proxies for all these protected classes. And what we are seeing is that the three fairness techniques that I mentioned at the data level, the algorithm level, and also even at the decision level would require you to have access to some of these demographics information, to some of these protected classes. And so automatically there is a tension between privacy and fairness. On one side, there is fair housing requirement. I mean, the law requires you to make sure that your solution is not discriminatory, you're not perpetuating bias. On the other side, the same data says that you need to remove the bias could also qualify as, could actually expose you to privacy risk. So that's why we've been thinking about how can we allow, privacy enhancing techniques or technologies and algorithmic fairness techniques to coexist. Now, there are studies that show that when you look at either of those independently in conjunction with how model performs, the performance of your model is going to deteriorate, right? So though we are of the opinion that, there's no trade-off, right? When you're trying to look at fairness techniques or you're looking at privacy techniques. Now, so what is really top of mind for us is how can we leverage both privacy enhancing technologies that ensure that the use of AI in housing still preserve the privacy of individuals and the data, and also fairness techniques to ensure that the solutions, AI solutions in housing are equitable for everyone, right? While still making sure that we retain the performance of the model. So that's why we've been looking at combining privacy and fairness together.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. I'm a data scientist by trade, right? It's a really complex issue. Like, for somebody who's versed in data science, you also have to understand data privacy. What about the legal aspects? What about the user research? And so it's really a lot that we kind of expect people to do, and that's why it's important at Zillow we have a cross-functional working group. I got to work with legal experts, with government relationships and comms, and it really takes a multidisciplinary team to understand this issue, comprehensively, and really sort of check each other that, I'm really excited about this technology, but the lawyer in the room might tell me like, well, hold on, let's think about that. And really this collaboration is really important. And the second aspect is then externally, that's why, as I mentioned, our mission is to turn on the lights for our customer, but also for the industry. So us coming here, 2 months ago, we were at a Responsible AI Symposium with Michael, like really being able to open about some of these challenges and really working together across sectors with government, civil rights advocates, nonprofits. That's just another sort of thing that's almost a must. One more thought on that is we also thinking like, we want to go even further. We are actually working on open sourcing some of our work. Especially when it comes to guardrails that we want to put on top of AI models, because we feel that probably the same problems we're facing, others might be as well, and we want to help the community to build safer and more equitable AI cutting-edge technology, but doing it in a responsible way.
Can you give kind of just a couple of more specific examples of what you're working on?
Yeah, so I think I was at a panel earlier about generative AI and large language models. I mean, it's really exciting technology for all of us. And at Zillow, we've been trying it out, of course. As you might imagine, there's so many applications where this can really transform the way people can learn about housing, understand the different choices they have, and have a conversation. But of course, we also learned that there are issues, right? Chatbot out of the box is just not aware of these issues. It doesn't have the knowledge. And so we've been working on a guardrail service that we sort of build as a platform that internal teams at Zillow, if they want to have a chat-based experience, they can augment it with a fair housing aware system that can sort of provide a check box, if you will, to say that, hey, user might be asking something that might be harmful, or the output from the model is something that might be harmful. And really it's about sort of, having an AI system that respects the same boundaries we would set for real estate agents. So for us, AI is not really that different than a real estate agent, and the same guidance we would have for a real estate agent. We want to make sure that our system is adhering to. And so we build another system sort of as another layer on top of large language models that makes it, fair housing and fair lending aware. And again, that's the work we want to share with the community.
Okay, I've kind of this is a personal question. I'm interested, but what are some of those guardrails you have for real estate agents? Like when you say that, what's that type of data?
What I meant is that, you can imagine, again, if you have a friendly conversation with your friend, you might ask something like, what are the best neighborhoods in Austin for certain specific demographic race? And again, this might be okay thing to say to your friend, but in real estate transaction context, it's important to realize that there's a history of discrimination, and decisions shouldn't be made based on protected classes. So we want to make sure in that case we inform the customer like, hey, you're using protected classes. I might not be able to help you with that, or I might want to connect you to human, because in that case the system, should not be responding.
Yeah. Did you have something to add, Michael?
No.
Oh, okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Andre, is you were talking about how real estate agents are using this more as well. And so maybe you could talk about that a little bit, just the other side of it.
I think a lot of the stuff we talk about is, how do many of you look for houses, think about which house to rent. But at Zillow, we also, try to empower our real estate partners to be as effective. And we've been really listening to real estate agents, trying to understand how do they spend their day. And there's just so much potential where AI can help you be more efficient. We see agents spending hours trying to catch up on no's, trying to understand who is on the phone, trying to have a transcripts. Again, these are all things that AI is pretty good at that can really help them, so that they can spend time where they really matter the most, which is the human connection, helping really understand deeply your needs, taking you to tour houses in person. And so that's where we see a lot of potential, as well as education. Again, there's a fair housing, but some of this bias that we deal with, that Michael described, is coming from human decisions in the past. And I think AI is also a powerful tool to help you say, hey, before you post a listing description, maybe you might want to reconsider. Maybe there's a more inclusive way to write that, and make it more equitable. So we think there's a big upside in using AI in many different applications like that.
Yeah, I just like to add one or a few sentences, because you mentioned education, right? So I think, the language model application that you're working on, that you also plan to open source, is definitely going to be a game changer in terms of changing or transforming search experience, right? So you could think of how people traditionally search for properties, right? So you go on Zillow, you have some listings. So the way I think that may really be more, helpful in terms of changing search experience is that, consumers will even be more informed, right? In terms of using some prompts already that can be personalized or customized to them, right? So gone are the days where, this is what I'm thinking about the future of search, right, in real estate, where maybe you just approach an agent with maybe basic questions, but now you have your own prompts, you have information that is coming from, for example, the applications you're developing, and the consumers that will actually be approaching agents will be more informed in terms of what they're looking for, that will be more personalized and customized to them, right? And I think that's where AI can also help. Most of the algorithms that you probably even have, let's say simple, traditional, or classical statistical models, they leverage aggregate data. But you could imagine a situation where even as a consumer, you have your own personal consumer report that you actually just feed into the system. And based on that information, the application is making recommendations to you that, okay, well, these are suggestions or things you could do or conversations you could initiate with your agent. So I think it will be an educational tool both for agents and also for consumers.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think that there's a component of this that, where the consumer, the buyer, is going to need to be more educated as well when using the products? Or do you think that that's something is that something that Zillow is kind of building in so that it can kind of catch the consumer when they're doing certain things? But I just feel in terms of bias or asking certain questions or kind of getting narrowed into a certain search, how do you think about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, after you.
No, it's a good question. I think one of the things that's really interesting about real estate is that, if I think about all the people on the Zillow site and app today, there's all kinds of expertise and journey, right? There's the first-time buyers, the current renters, the people who sold and bought many houses. So the level of education is highly varied. We want to obviously empower all of them. But as we use AI, we always want to make sure that we do it in a responsible way. I think the way we do that is that we have our ethical AI principles that we recently published on our site, and so pretty much anything we do, we want to make sure is done in a fair way, in an inclusive way, accounting for everybody's needs. It's transparent so the user knows that AI is being used, and it's done in a safe way with respect to the privacy of the data that we use and the external models we might be using as well. And so so we want to make sure that users are aware, and we certainly want to make sure we sort of expand your options. Again, like I mentioned before, it used to be that you have to be very specific. You have to say zip code. Now, if you say zip code, there's a boundary drawn that's been kind of more or less arbitrary. We want to make sure that the buyer or the seller on Zillow is sort of, it's more inclusive of all the different options you have. So it's not about like steering or nudging user towards a specific angle we might have, but rather making sure you're aware of all these other options. In addition to what you want, here's the other thing you should consider. So that's kind of the approach we're thinking.
So I agree with you. The only thing I would like to just quickly add is that historically, when we think about regulations, so we have the Fair Housing Act, we have the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, right? With all these regulations, we know for a fact that discrimination, bias, they are still ongoing, even in housing. And to me, what that means is that there is a role that consumers can also play, right? Yeah. So that means in addition to how companies are trying to self-regulate, in addition to the role that government agencies are playing in terms of legislating AI, I think a fourth force in addition to civil rights role is AI literacy. So the more consumers are informed in terms of how not to even ask the wrong questions or how not to take the wrong questions or wrong requests to agents, right? The less we actually see some of these systems perpetuating or worsening discrimination in housing. So yes, there is the role of AI literacy, and we also need, like you mentioned, inclusiveness. We need to bring in our consumers into that conversation as well.
And I just want to add, there are certain cases where people might feel like, I don't want to ask this question to somebody. What if I'm going to get judged, right? Can I afford this house?
Exactly.
Is my income enough? How do I get help with down payment assistance? Can I afford the next month's rent? Right? And so you can imagine where having some chat-based experience, maybe having a chatbot behind it can actually help you bridge that gap and will tell you no, this is what you can do, and this is the human you can get in touch with. So again, we're trying to see AI as really an enabler that can really bridge the gap in some of these cases.
Okay, I have a naive question. So if I'm a consumer and I'm looking and I'm asking those types of questions, I'm assuming you're saying on Zillow, is that updated through my personal profile? So that's data that you upload, and then it can kind of communicate with you through that. So it's all kind of what you're putting in, and then.
Yeah, so and I think we do have a lot of expertise we built over the years. We have a lot of content on our site. We were trying to think about how the chat-based experiences can be able to help you find the right answer in the domain of our data. We obviously don't think that chatbot that's been trained by another company in this general domain is able to have the expertise. Right. We want to make sure that everything we say is grounded in facts, and so that's the type of system we're trying to build.
And that's what you were talking about too before, was that how AI can also be used to help with the research, help learn more about these biases, help learn more about historical issues that we've had in the past, and then kind of help us move forward in the correct way. We have 5 minutes left. Are there any questions from the crowd? Anyone? We have one up here. Do we have a mic?
Well, thank you. First, thank you so much for an excellent talk. I wrote down a few other questions, and you addressed them as you were going on.
All right.
Great.
Bias is so important, and especially with large language models and the data that you use to train these, Zillow-specific chatbots, I guess, that sits on top of these large language models. How are you identifying the bias, and then, most importantly, surfacing that bias back to the user if you identify bias, if you are at all?
Yeah, I want to make it clear that we experimenting with large language model technologies, so we're learning our way. We're taking our time to really make sure we exactly understand what you're pointing out. We are kind of releasing our guardrail system first to make sure when we eventually put our product out there, it's safe and equitable. And so that's really what we're aware of, and really to make sure I want to say that we're really trying to make sure that we use large language models as an interface to surface all the factual information we have at Zillow, as opposed to, here's a question for ChatGPT, I get an answer, I'm just going to trust it. So I think there's maybe a little bit different mindset, what you might see elsewhere. We really want to make sure it's a convenient way for users to get the answer based on the factual information we have. I don't know, Michael, if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, so I mean, when I get question, again, thanks for your question, and it looks like we did a good job because you said that we're able to address many of your questions, right? So when I think about bias, so I always think about it like statistical bias, right? But I think what you're trying to say, based on your response, is more on at the data level and also the decision, right? And it's so easy because like in housing, we know that we have 7 protected classes where when you evaluate your data or you evaluate the decisions coming out of your systems, right? You want to make sure that you don't see disparate outcomes along those 7 protected classes, which are race, color, national origin, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Like, I think talking to Andre, I was talking about red teaming and how Zillow is also looking into like identifying or testing these different approaches, making sure that, for example, when you submit a prompt, the response you get is not different just because you're changing your zip code from, let's say, a majority white neighborhood to a majority black neighborhood, right? Exactly, because the moment you do that and you're beginning to see differences in your outcomes or the response that is coming from the applications, that is a time for a human who is actually governing the system to actually step in and proactively correct the system, right? So that's one way of looking at it. And I always say that one of the best areas to really understand this issue of bias and discrimination is housing, because we know that these are the lines or different areas where you can proactively identify all these different sources of bias and effectively mitigate them.
Yeah, I think one thing we actually talked before, and I don't know how much we have, I don't think we've talked about that much on the panel right now, but is how important the human is in in all of this. So it's not just building an algorithm and having it just be the single thing that a consumer is interacting with, but also having the human be included.
Yeah, human. So I always like to call it human-centered governance. So it's not just about like having human in the loop, because I mean there is a lot of instances where some of the issues we're addressing now were actually caused by humans. So when we talk about redlining, we're talking about discrimination, digital redlining, right? These were policies that human actually put in place, but having human in the loop and also giving them authority, right, to identify this issue and, proactively calling attention to how to address the issue, right? So that's one of the things that I always like to propose.
Yeah, and I thought it was really cool too, Andre, before you were talking about diversity in your team in terms of creating these algorithms, and you mentioned a little bit before, but just I thought it was really cool to hear about how Zillow is incorporating not just diversity, racial diversity, but also legal and like the different departments and having the right people around the table to help kind of get us out of a single focus.
So one of the things I asked there, Andre, when I went to the booth was that, okay, can you tell me about these folks? And then I was so impressed that you have your product people, you have your legal people, you have your governance affairs people, and then you also have the data science people, right? So that's the type of diversity that could really help to identify and also mitigate some of these issues.
And the other example was anecdotal, but pre-pandemic, we were so Seattle focused. I live in Seattle, Zillow headquarters Seattle. We were just like, let's test this in Seattle, right? And it's such a local thing. Now we are fully remote and my team is distributed. And suddenly you have this diversity of understanding for the nuances of the local market and just bringing that into the design of the AI system early on. It just really changes that perspective and how we design our system in a more inclusive way.
Awesome. I think that's a great point to end on. And I'm going to keep us on time on my panel for sure. So thank you both so much. And thank you for the great questions. That's my favorite part of all of this. So I think you both will be around for a while if people want to come up and chat. But thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
You got this one?